We're just in the nick of time.
What time is it?
What time is it? Get out. Go on.
Hello folks, and welcome back to the Laurel and Hardy blogcast. I'm Patrick Vasey, the author of the Laurel and Hardy blog, and this is episode 4. And what a packed episode it is. Over the course of the next hour or so, we're going to be taking a little look at the Blu-ray DVD release Laurel and Hardy, the definitive restorations. And as usual, we'll also be joined by my special guest as we discuss the next 2 films in the Laurel and Hardy chronology. And those films are Why Girls Love Sailors and With Love and Hisses, both from 1927. Now, I'm sure many of you will be aware that on the 16th of June, we in our own ways celebrated the 130th birthday of our beloved Stan Laurel. But what some of you may not know is that the day before, the 15th of June, was the birthday of silent comedy star Harry Langdon, born in 1884. Over the years, Langdon was good friends with the boys and worked with them many times as a writer and even appearing alongside Babe Hardy in the elephant movie Zenobia. But his influence on Laurel and Hardy as a team, and particularly Stan Laurel as a comic performer, goes back much earlier than that, and this is one of the topics that we're going to explore a little later in the programme. To help me to discuss all of this and much more besides, we'll be crossing over the Atlantic Ocean once again, this time to Toronto, Canada, where waiting to join us for this episode is longtime silent comedy aficionado, blogger, and all-around nice guy Mr. Scribe Files himself, Chris Seguin.
Now, whatever you do, don't go to sleep.
Thank you to everyone who has sent me feedback and for all your positive comments since the last episode. It means such a lot to know that you're enjoying the podcasts and the blogs too. I particularly like Bill's comment that he has already listened to every episode twice and will listen to them again as they're so chock full of information, so thanks for that, Bill. Also, special thanks to Christopher, to Ron, Nick, Leah and Laura for all your kind words, your great comments and your continued support.
1,000 thanks.
Now, before we get into the episode properly, I just wanted to correct an oversight from the first few episodes, which is that I played a snippet or two from a couple of interviews with Stan Laurel from the 1950s. The original and the full interviews for these, which are a lot clearer than the copies I used, incidentally, can be found on the CDs that accompany John Teftella's very special books on the boys, Laurel and Hardy on the radio and on the phone, and Laurel and Hardy on the stage. So thank you to John for the use of these clips.
Thank you, ma'am.
And John has agreed to guest on a future podcast with us, which is great, and talk about his collection and collecting in general. But unfortunately, there's a few technical issues that I need to sort out in order to make that happen. But watch this space, that should be a special episode. Links to both of John's books can be found in the show notes and, of course, on the Laurel and Hardy blog website. And so, as promised, I thought I'd just mention the new Blu-ray DVD release, Laurel and Hardy, the definitive restorations. It finally arrived. I got my copy slightly after my birthday, which was a bit disappointing, but there we go. Ordered it in April. It was released on Stan's birthday, the 16th of June, but shipping of the Blu-rays at least was delayed due to a global pandemic, as I'm sure we all know, and also a tornado, I think, ripping the roof off the Blu-ray factory. Typical Laurel and Hardy, isn't it? But 4 days into July, there it was on the doormat, the eagerly anticipated 4-disc Blu-ray release of Laurel and Hardy, the definitive restorations. Now, this release has been tempting and teasing fans for months. 4 discs, or 6 if you have the DVD, of the best restored prints of some of the best loved comedy classics from our favourite duo. Sons of the Desert, Way Out West, Helpmates, Toad in a Hole, County Hospital, Busybodies, etc., etc., the list goes on. And it even includes, for the first time ever on home video release, the almost fully restored Battle of the Century. Almost fully restored. It's been fully restored, but it's almost full, almost complete. But that's not all. The discs also include, That's That, the outtake reel, produced exclusively for one of Stan Laurel's birthdays. The Tree in a Test Tube, again, all restored in lovely colour, and almost 9 hours of extras in total, including original scripts, trailers for films, filmed interviews, a fantastic interview with Anita Garvin, which was just sublime. I could have listened to that for hours. There's also audio interviews. We have some of the film's original cast and crew, image galleries galore, not to mention expert commentaries from the likes of Randy Skretvet and Richard Ban. I mean, this is sort of the sort of treatment that we've been waiting for it seems like forever. But does it live up to the hype? For me, personally, yes, it does. The image quality is unbelievable. It's outstanding. I've viewed many different copies of the boys' films over the years, but these discs are so clear, so sharp. In many cases, you just can't believe they weren't filmed yesterday. I mean, there's so much more detail to see. Some of the image size, the screen size is bigger. We're seeing more of the frame than we've ever seen before. Just fantastic. I'm just at a loss to describe how good that they look nowadays. To think they're 90 to 100 years old is just unbelievable. I read someone on social media very recently describing the experience as similar to the first time they put on a new pair of spectacles and realised they could actually see everything clearly for the first time. And yeah, it's a very, very good analogy. It does convey this experience very well. All the films presented have incredibly sharp, crisp, clear images. The only ones that slightly differ, at least to me, were Sons of the Desert and Bratz. They weren't as sharp as the rest, but still very, very good. I mean, that's nitpicking at its extreme. So far, I've sort of dipped into the extras. I've been sort of focusing on the quality of the films first to kind of report back. And yeah, there are some mouth-watering stills galleries. There's many, many images on there that I have never seen before. And I'm sure as fans of Laurel Hardy, when you see a still for the first time, an image for the first time that you've never seen before, it's quite an event. So to suddenly see a gallery of images that you've never seen before it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely brilliant. There's a host of audio interviews as well, and these appear to be the same interviews I think that are included in Randy Skretvet's CD that accompanied his new volume, his deluxe volume, the hardback volume of The Magic Behind the Movies. So if you have that, you will probably have heard some of these, but still to have them all in one package is just brilliant. Over the years, we've had some fabulous sets of restored Chaplin films, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, but Laurel and Hardy restorations have been a little bit lacking, I think. In 2018, we of course had the very best of Laurel and Hardy, the the Blu-ray, which was very widely anticipated, but it was a bit of a letdown. It was just repackaged, not substandard, but it wasn't as good as what we should have. But thank goodness, Messrs. Skretvet and Ban and everybody else involved in the latest triumph have finally put things right. At least in my eyes. There are people on social media that have been disappointed, let's say, thinking it's too clear, too crisp. And yeah, I can understand people like that sort of grainy look, I suppose, to old films. And I think it's subjective, really. For me, I love it. I'm very pleased with it. Not only are we treated to excellent picture quality, there are some reinstated soundtracks from a number of the films, including Birthmarks, his original 1929 release, and that makes a totally different viewing experience of that film, especially the opening sequence at the Santa Fe railway station. The 1936 reissue that we're all very familiar with, the soundtrack had the jaunty cuckoo dance theme playing over the top, but the 1929 track is much more reliant on the realistic sounds of the station environment, and I think is much better for it. Negative comments? Not really, not to my mind. What there is here is perfect for me, and I think we should be very grateful for it. If I wanted to, not nitpick, but if I wanted to have an ideal package, I would have liked to have seen maybe a cardboard slipcase and a booklet, similar to the outstanding Masters of Comedy series, the Buster Keaton releases from Eureka. But again, it's not a criticism, it's more of an observation, and no, I'm very grateful to have what we've got. As far as I'm concerned, all fans and collectors should invest in this set. They are absolutely wonderful to see. But arguably, I think we should support the restorations and the preservation of these films by purchasing physical copies. The unthinkable amount of work and dedication that goes into a release like this can't come cheap. And if we don't support these projects by putting our hands into our pockets, then we're going to see less and less preservation work done and less released onto the home video market. So we must support releases like this. If you're on the fence as to whether to buy one or not, I say please get off the fence and order one today. You really, really won't regret it. Affiliate links to purchase copies of the definitive restorations can be found on the show notes and of course on the Laurel and Hardy blog website. And whilst on the subject of DVD releases, you may remember Rob Stone, our special guest for episode 1, spoke about a forthcoming release of restored Stan and Babe solo films. Well, the folks over at Lobster have finally released the set in France. And it looks amazing with never before released titles and also in excellent quality. This is a DVD only set at the moment for reasons unknown, but as I understand it, there is also a Blu-ray set scheduled for a US release shortly, so watch this space. Again, links to purchase the French set can be found in the show notes and on the blog's website. So much to watch, so little time. Anyway, I think it's about time we popped over to Canada for today's interview. Today's special guest on the podcast is a man who describes himself as having an all-encompassing infatuation with comedy, including W.C. Fields, the Marx Brothers, Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton, Abbott and Costello, Harry Langdon, Larry Salmon, and of course he's a lifelong fan of Laurel Hardy. He's a fellow blogger, his blog website, The Scribe Files, has a huge following, and he's very present on many of the social media platforms. He was chosen by the British Film Institute to provide a video essay on their 2018 Blu-ray release of Atoll K. In its accompanying booklet, the BFI describe him as a dedicated Laurel and Hardy archivist and aficionado of the highest order, which is praise indeed. So, it's with great pleasure that I welcome today's special guest all the way from Toronto, Canada, Mr. Chris Seguin. Chris, welcome to the Laurel and Hardy blogcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Patrick. I'm really impressed with what you've been doing so far with your blog and listening to the blog, the blogcast. I might get you to edit that, but an amazing job and just pleased to be part of it so far. Very early in the game.
Thank you for your kind words. Excellent. It's great to have you. I love reading your blogs, Chris. Your passion for comedy from this period really, comes off the screen or off the page. So I've really been looking forward to chatting with you today. What I'd like to do, if we can, is just begin, if we may, just by telling us your Laurel and Hardy backstory. How you first came across them and got into the films, and what is it about them that sort of appeals to you, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think one of the things is that kind of my gateway drug to silent comedy and classic comedy in general was not Laurel and Hardy, it was Buster Keaton. So I'm going to do a little detour into Buster Keaton for a second, because when you grew up in Canada and you were my age, so this would be in the 70s, they would, in the classrooms, they would trot out a 16 millimeter projector and they'd show all these old movies from the National Film Board of Canada, which was a government bureaucracy that promoted Canadian film. And you looked forward to it because, hey, I don't have to be taught anything right now. I can just watch a movie for half an hour or something like that. And then they brought out one called The Railrodder, which was a film that Buster Keaton made about a little over a year before he passed away in the fall of 1964. So it was pretty recent at the time, and I was really just mesmerized by this strange old man who never smiled, and it was just fascinating to me. I had never seen a silent comedy before. I had never seen anything like it, and it was transformative. And if you do read my blog, it kind of set me off on a whole new course in life for reasons too complicated to get here. But what happened was, about a year after seeing that, they brought out the 16 millimeter projector again, and they showed Buster Keaton's The General. And I went, wait a second, that's that guy from that movie, except he's young, and this is in black and white. And I went, okay, here's a guy who doesn't smile, who makes movies where he doesn't talk, on trains. It seems very specific that he was just on trains at the time. So those two films really resonated with me. And it wasn't much longer after that the local TV station started broadcasting some of the old classic two-reelers at the time. It would have been the Our Gang films, Little Rascals, and the Three Stooges. And these are just things, again, that were totally alien to me. I had seen sitcoms and that sort of thing, but these, especially the Little Rascals with the Hal Roach music and this weird 1930s environment, just fascinated me. And that ultimately led to, a little bit later, them showing Laurel and Hardy. And that was, to me, transformative. I have never seen anything like it. I became absolutely obsessed with them. I was just getting into an age where I could start to afford Super 8 films, and the idea that you could own a film, that you could buy a movie and you could project it in your house and watch it, was the greatest thing ever. And in fact, the first movie I ever bought on Super 8 was With Love and Hisses, which we're going to be talking about later today. I bought a 200-foot reel, which was a one-reel version from Mountain Films in the UK, because living in Canada, I lived in this kind of netherworld that was half British, half American. So if I had the money, I'd buy a Black Hawk film, because those were complete and expensive. If I didn't have the money, I'd order from the UK a 50-foot reel, so a little 3-minute cut down of a Laurel and Hardy film, silent, or a 200-foot. And I still have them to this day, this kind of obsessive collection of 8mm films that I go back to every now and then, because they really are a bit of time travel. So yeah, that was from there. Super quickly, I found out there was a Sons of the Desert tent in Windsor, Ontario, my hometown. A fellow named Derek Petro and my friend Tony Marchand ran it. Derek actually had a movie theater in his house with fold-down movie theater seats. They screened 16mm films. I was 16. My friend David Salusny and I joined. They were a bit older, so it was a bit odd that these 16-year-old boys would be going to these older guys' houses. But we just watched the movies, and it was great. It was just always such a fun experience. And the thing with Laurel and Hardy was, like, I love all these other people. I love the Marx Brothers. I love the Stooges. I love W.Z. Fields. But Laurel and Hardy were like your friends. You know, they had this very palpable affection for each other, and you just liked to spend time with them. And I find that my experience is a lot the same as many other people's, where I know that people like Randy Scrett will say the same thing, which is when you're watching Laurel and Hardy, you're spending time with old friends. And it's just a very pleasant way to spend 20 minutes or 75 minutes or whatever. That would lead to, like, picking up Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, the John McCabe biography, which at the time was about the only book you could get on Laurel and Hardy, except for William K. Everson's The Films of Laurel and Hardy. And that's where you got to know the men behind the characters, right? And there's a really telling thing on the cover of McCabe's book where it's called An Affectionate Biography. And that's a bit of its time, but also very true. You really get a sense of, obviously McCabe loved Laurel and Hardy, especially his friendship with Stan. And that affection comes through, and that word permeates everything Laurel and Hardy.
Gee, this is certainly nice of you.
Isn't that swell?
What I also wanted to pick up, in your introduction, I mentioned the BFI release of Atoll K, and I know, reading your blogs and seeing you online, you are a big advocate of that film, of Atoll K, which is a very divisive film in the Laurel and Hardy community. So I know I'm jumping way ahead of the chronology for this podcast, but to hell with it, it's going to take me years to get to Atoll K anyway. So I just want to ask you, what is it about Atoll K that really resonates with you? Why are you such a fan of that film?
I think it begins with, I had mentioned William K. Everson's book, The Films of Laurel and Hardy. And it's an interesting book because it gets a little deep into all of the Hal Roach films. And then when it gets to the Fox films, it summarizes everything in about 3 sentences. It says, yeah, it's terrible. This one's better than the last one, but they're all terrible. But it told a little bit of the backstory of Atoll K, which just sounded interesting, but it was also accompanied by this really odd picture of Stan and Babe looking very old, especially Stan. And I think Everson makes a reference to Stan looking like Boris Karloff, and I couldn't say that was not an apt description. Now, at the time, this was well before dollar DVDs or pound DVDs. It was impossible to see, but there was a screening at a library in Michigan, in a nice little theater they had there. So I just thought it was really funny. I thought it was a funny film. It got a great reaction, and you didn't care that they were old, right? You're kind of taken aback, but you're going, because I talked about them being old friends. And so you stick with your old friends, right? And it's funny because I think right now there's a lot of revisionist thinking that the Fox films are better than everyone said they were. Like in Randy's original book, he was pretty dismissive of them. Everson was dismissive of them. I think even then I knew that there was something off about those films, that they weren't quite themselves. It felt alien from the rest of their films. but Atoll K felt like it was a part of them. It felt like they were back to being themselves. And I still watch it surprisingly often on our Facebook page, Subscribe Files. We actually had a watch party of it the other day.
Yes.
And
yeah.
People who like it a lot. But their timing is great. Their characters are there. Stan especially is back to not just being this kind of dimwit character that is in the Fox films. So what it feels like to me is that there's a little bit of a sense of loss, because you see that, like in Saps at Sea, they're starting to get very slapsticky and very broad. Right? Like it's a loud, noisy movie. Atoll K feels like it's a little bit more from 1935-36 in a way. Right? You can see how if they hadn't gone to Fox, that they could have aged gracefully. But if they had maintained that truth of their characters, right, and were just given the time to themselves, that you have this 10-year gap where they could have made some really terrific films together. And it's a shame that they didn't have that opportunity. So to me, it's less than this sad thing that, yes, they were sick, and yes, it was less than ideal circumstances, and there's problems with the scripts, but at least, I don't know, you get to visit them one more time, before they're gone. And we've been very fortunate in more recent years to have the recordings from the driver's license sketch and the on-the-spot sketch, especially, where people are literally screaming with laughter throughout that thing. So they never lost their skills, right? So I don't know if that answers properly why I'm such an advocate for Atoll K, other than they're kind of my friends, and I'm really just glad to see them, and they're older, but that doesn't matter to me. There's some beautiful stuff in there. That little section where they're loading the boat at the beginning. And I think I might point out in one of my blog posts, there's a really lovely thing when Stan finds the lifeboat, and Ollie goes, well, that's in place big enough to hold 4 people. And Stan goes, well, what about me, right? Yeah. And if you get it, okay, if that was like the Three Stooges or Abbott and Costello, slap in the face, move on, right? But Ollie's offended. Right? Like his feelings are hurt, and then Stan sees this and he's sad, right? And so he tries to give Ollie some succor, and then he pulls out his hanky, and Ollie goes to blow his nose, and he actually gets halfway through it before he catches himself, right? So they're able to take that super quick joke where it's arguably, if in the hands of another comic, it's a wisecrack. In Stan's hands, it's like he's actually kind of thinking it through, and he's concerned, right? and then he kind of gets it wrong, and then Ollie's hurt, and he has to deal with that. And it just is this really nice 1-minute summation of their relationship.
And the one thing I would say is that I know when I first saw Atoll K, it was on a VHS copy. It was very kind of sludgy, muddy print. It was horrible to look at. The sound was awful. I didn't know anything about the film, and there was the shock factor of how ill Stan looked, and I thought, what is this? And I think I even took it back in the end and got a refund and bought something else. But, seeing the Blu-ray version, which is such a good quality print, and the whole package with the booklet and everything is just a really nice thing to have. Certainly for a completist, if you want to have the whole gambit of work, you've got to have it. But I would certainly recommend anybody pick that up. And certainly, as we were discussing just before we started, the price of that Blu-ray is absolutely it's peanuts now. I mean, it's about £8, I think, the last time I looked on Amazon. So yeah, I would absolutely say try it again. If you're off, been put off by previous prints that you've seen, give it another try. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous print. Doug Weir at the BFI spearheaded that, and it looks terrific. What's nice about it is that it's the complete version, which up until recently was almost impossible to come by. It had come out on another DVD at a certain point, but not a really terrific copy. But this is a really beautiful copy. It fills in a lot of plot holes, runs about 20 minutes longer than the general Utopia. And it also has a very good commentary track by Glenn Mitchell, who wrote the Laurel Hardy Encyclopedia. So you get a lot of background on the film. So you get the history lesson of it as well. And also just some great extras. Like there's a really great Mabel Normand short called Should Men Walk Home. And a terrific scene with Babe and Mabel Normand where she's a jewel thief who dropped a brooch into a bowl of punch, and Babe's just trying to get a drink of punch, and she wants to make sure he doesn't drink the brooch. And just delightful. So there's lots of extras on there to look at, and well worth the money, even at twice of what you're talking about right now.
I'd agree with that, yeah. And how did, just out of pure interest, how did that actually come about? How did the involvement with the BFI come about, Chris?
Well, my involvement came as a long road, which was of a friend named Ulrich Rudel. And I've known him for years, and he's originally from Germany. And he knows that I'm an Atoll K file. And he has a friend named Norbert Aping, who wrote a book about the making of the film. So I knew Norbert. I had talked to him a few times on the phone. He was also based in Germany. And so Norbert had written this insanely comprehensive book about the making of Atoll K. And anyone who doesn't have it really should get it, whether or not you like the film. It's just one of the most interesting stories of the making of a film I've ever read. So Norbert was working on that, and he had a contract to do an English edition, but his English is a bit Germanic in a way. So I'd reached a deal with Norbert to go, well, what I'll do is I'll smooth it over, and I'll kind of turn it into a more digestible form of Americanized English for you, which is easier said than done. So I spent a good amount of time working on not really a translation, but a little editing of it. And so it was through Uli a couple years ago, almost 2 years ago now, when they had proposed this happening. Uli let me know that the BFI was putting this out, and I went, oh, I got to be part of this somehow. And that's how that came to be.
Okay, so we've picked up that. So the Atoll K, obviously, right at the end of Laurel and Hardy's film career. I wouldn't say their career, but their film career. I'm just gonna drag us right the way back to not quite to the beginning, although I suppose we could say to the beginning. You and I were in conversation fairly recently about the influence of Harry Langdon on Laurel and Hardy, particularly on Stan Laurel. And you had some very interesting points about that. I wonder if you could just talk us through that a little bit, because we're in 1927 now on the blogcast, and we're looking at Why Girls Love Sailors and With Love and Hisses. So I think, before we get too far down the road of their career, I think this might be an ideal point in which just to have a look at the influence of, comedians around the boys.
Yeah, well, I think Harry Langdon, what's interesting is, again, during my very formative years of getting into silent classic comedy, the first film I had seen with him was Saturday Afternoon, which I believe was done in 1926 at Senate, but not released till later. And it's very much a prototype Laurel and Hardy film. It's kind of the same zone as Their Purple Moment or that sort of thing. He's paired up with Vernon Dent, who probably a lot of people are familiar with. Over here in North America, it's because he was in a million Three Stooges shorts. But he's a big, burly guy. And the basis of Saturday Afternoon is, hey, let's go out and cheat on our wives and come on along with me, Harry, who's this innocent, who doesn't want to, but he does. So it's got that kind of, a little bit of Sons of the Desert sort of things, where it's like, hey, come on and let's sneak out. And Stan is like, well, no, honesty is the best politics, and doesn't want to. So, but Harry Langdon was this very unusual character in that he moved very slowly, right? Like lots of slow blinks and trying to figure stuff out. And when you see a lot of people taking on his traits, so you can see Buster Keaton in college doing a little bit of Harry Langdon stuff. You can see even Chaplin in The Circus doing a little bit of Harry Langdon. So he was just kind of in the air, but I don't think anyone kind of embraced that as much as Stan did. You don't see it right away. You'll see little bits of him becoming a little bit more babyish in some of his Joe Rock things, but he hasn't evolved that much. By the time you get to the films like we'll talk about later a little bit, those early Teaming or the All-Star films, he's just kind of developed this, what Charlie Chase would call his own character later on, the Nance character, right? So he's a bit fey, he still hasn't really found where he's at. And he needs his Vernon Dent more than Harry did, right? Like Stan on his own isn't really kind of working until I think probably the first time is Do Detectives Think, when they were really kind of teamed together. Arguably Duck Soup, but that kind of happened and then went away. That's why I'd love to see Hats Off, because I think Hats Off might be the first time he gets away from that more effeminate character. You see that in the second 100 years, because then it's Hats Off, and then it's Battle of the Century. And in Battle of the Century, especially in the first reel, he's in full Harry Langdon mode, right? Moving very slowly, lots of blinking. He gets punched in the face and he goes to sleep, which is very much a Harry Langdon move.
With his bum up in the air.
Pardon me?
With his bum up in the air.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when I wrote up something about this, I did a lot of frame captures, and you can see that that's doing an exact Harry Langdon pose, right? So what they did was they took this Harry Langdon Vernon Dent partnership and made it something unique and a little bit purer. But Stan isn't as odd or otherworldly as Harry is. He's a little bit more grounded, which makes him more relatable, arguably, than Harry is, but very, very much in that zone. And I find it almost impossible to believe that Laurel and Hardy would have developed as they did if Harry Langdon didn't come along. And that's why it makes sense. There's two things. I was going to mention Harry writing for them, but the new DVD release of the Hal Roach shorts that Harry Langdon did came out recently. And those are very divisive. If you want to talk about Atoll K being divisive, look at the Harry Langdon Roach shorts, right? It took me watching this new set to really, really appreciate them, because there's some nice stuff in there. But what happens in almost every short is there's a scene where everything grinds to a halt so Harry can have a 3-minute pantomime routine, right? So there's an amazing thing, a film called Skyboy, which is only presented as silent, where because the soundtrack is missing, the discs, but he's on a glacier deserted with Thelma Todd and Eddie Dunn. So Eddie Dunn, who's the villain, wants Harry to give him a shave so that Thelma will find him more attractive. So Harry goes up and asks Thelma, will you like him better if I give him a shave? And Thelma essentially takes her finger and slices her throat. Right? And Harry goes, okay, and walks over. And he does this whole routine where his hand is tied to a fishing line and he's got a straight razor in his hand. He's tried to shave Eddie Dunn while a fish is tugging on his wrist. And it's a sharp razor, right? So it's just a great scene. So my point being, he'll do these little things that you see Stan kind of doing later. Like the idea of Stan eating an apple in Sons of the Desert for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Is, that's a pure Harry Langdon thing. Or even just taking the time in County Hospital to eat a hard-boiled egg. And then if you extrapolate it even more, the bottling of the wine in Bohemian Girl, or the St. Bernard in Swiss Miss. So it kind of doesn't come as a surprise that Langdon wrote for them later on. And there's tons of examples of things where Stan is performing gags that Harry did before, like in Saps at Sea with the horn droning on at the beginning. That's lifted from Langdon's The Big Kick that he did for Roach, kind of thing. There's a great scene in Blockheads when the stove blows up and Stan runs all the way downstairs and he pushes the building to make sure it's not going to collapse. That's a very Harry Langdon thing. So absolutely, Harry Langdon is probably one of the, theoretically one of the best writers to have on the Laurel and Hardy team. And that's also why it's not a surprise that when they were having contract issues and they made the Elephant movie, in quotes, the much maligned Elephant movie, that the idea that, well, let's just take out Stan and put Harry Langdon in there makes total sense. Yeah. That you could go, okay, Ollie is Vernon Dent, Harry is Stan, etc. So it makes sense. It just doesn't work because the script doesn't allow them to do that. And also, chemistry is chemistry. I'm going to use my Three Stooges knowledge, which is when they brought in a fellow named Joe Besser, who's a very, very funny comic, but just the chemistry isn't there, right? And so, I don't think there was any opportunity for Ollie and Harry Langdon, or Babe and Harry Langdon, to have that chemistry, which again leads me back to Atoll, which is, you see the chemistry there. The chemistry never went away between those two, right? But there's a ton of instances of Stan really channeling Harry Langdon and ultimately surpassing him, right? Like Harry Langdon remains a footnote today, and Laurel and Hardy are still revered the world over. So,
yeah, I'm not, to be honest, I'm not very familiar with a lot of Harry Langdon's work. I mean, just in preparing for this podcast, I've looked at a couple. Saturday Night was one, or Saturday Afternoon, was it?
Saturday Afternoon, yes.
Saturday Afternoon, yeah, and also Tramp I watched as well, which was brilliant. And you can't help but be, he's very endearing. You do sort of really get to like the character.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm looking for similarities between he and Stan, and you can certainly see those. They are evident, as you say. There's sort of the blinking eyes, and the parts where he kind of, when he's contemplating and he puts his knuckles to his mouth, and you see that a lot with Stan, certainly in his solo films and in the early All-Star films.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely influence there, absolutely.
Well, you should see, I would recommend The Strong Man, which is probably his best film, and that was directed by Frank Capra, and that gets into a whole other zone. But there's a scene in there where, there's a couple scenes. There's a scene where he is being seduced by a woman who's trying to get some stolen money that's hidden in his jacket, and he doesn't know it's in there, right? So she's this temptress who tells Harry that she's, the girl he's been looking for, because the girl he's looking for is a blind girl he's been corresponding with. And so, and the picture he has of her is very battered up, so he doesn't know what Mary Smith looks like, right? So she says, "Oh, I'm little Mary Smith," plays innocent, and then tries to seduce him and reach into his clothes and steal this money that's hidden in there. And you go, okay, that's exactly like Mary Roberts in Way Out West and Lola Marcel, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm Mary Roberts, sweet and innocent, and then locks Stan up in the bedroom,
yeah,
and essentially assaults him, right? So, the thing that Stan brings up into it is the laughing thing, right?
Yeah.
But then there's also a scene later on in The Strong Man where, when Harry does meet Mary Smith finally, he tells her the story. And even though she's blind, oddly enough, he pantomimes it out to her. But that's exactly the same scene that's in Way Out West later when Stan takes Mary Roberts into the freezer.
Into the booth, yes.
And goes, here's what happens. And they've got the music playing, etc., but you can't hear what's being said. So that's before Langdon started working with them as a scriptwriter, because that started with Blockheads a couple films later. But I don't know if Stan was hanging out with Harry or because I think what happened, my understanding is Harry in the mid-ish 30s did a tour of Australia, and when he came back he was essentially homeless, and he stayed with Stan for a while. So I got to assume that they forged a pretty strong friendship when Harry was at Roach originally. Because obviously Stan revered his work, and I think that having Harry on the same lot at the time that Laurel and Hardy's star was ascending must have meant a lot for Stan. And you can see pictures of Stan's home in the 40s where an autographed picture of Harry's on the wall. So
yeah.
So obviously a lot of affection and respect for Harry Langdon, and it is interesting to see those Harry Langdon moments show up in what's arguably Laurel and Hardy's best film, and definitely Harry Langdon's best film, The Strong Man, because again, that wouldn't have happened without Harry. And I don't know if that was a trigger to bring Harry on, or if Harry actually contributed to that script uncredited for Way Out West. But it was definitely a mutually beneficial thing for both of them.
Yeah. Did Leo McCarey have anything to do with Harry Langdon in those Roach days? Because obviously, you're talking about them slowing the comedy down, and obviously, I think McCarey is credited for a lot of that with Laurel and Hardy. Did he have any working with Harry Langdon? Do you know?
No, my understanding is that Langdon came in after McCarey had gone.
Oh, right, okay.
So
okay.
I couldn't tell. I think McCarey left in 29 before. My understanding is McCarey left in 29 before the sound era.
Yes.
But he continued to get some credit for stuff that was either in production or whatever.
Yeah.
But no, he didn't have a say in any of that.
I found that interesting because, as you say, the Harry Langdon style is very much that, very slowed down and taking so much time over things, which is what Stan did. So I just wondered whether Stan just picked that up himself and started to integrate that into his own characters, or whether that was something, introduced to him by somebody else.
Well, it's an interesting question, because I do wonder, because Stan was so flailing to find a character.
Yeah.
Right. For so long, like almost 10 years, he was in films and never really kind of made it.
Yeah.
And, obviously McCarey was very influential at the Roach lot in the late 20s. And he may have been the one that said, here, try this. McCarey definitely gets credit for being the one to say, wait, Laurel and Hardy work well together. Why don't we try that? But he may have been a guiding force in suggesting to Stan, you might want to take the character a little bit this way. Like maybe he grabbed a print of Saturday Afternoon and showed it to Stan and went, you take a look at this, because this is you guys, right? This is interesting, but we can do it better. Or at least more as equals.
And we'll return to our interview with Chris very shortly. But now it's time for today's first audio blog.
It's enough to make a man burst out crying.
And today's first film in focus is Why Girls Love Sailors from 1927. It was filmed January 31st, 1927 to March 19th, 1927. It was a two-reeler produced by Hal Roach, directed by Fred Gill, with titles by H.M. Walker. The main cast, of course, Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy, Viola Richard, Malcolm Waite, and Anita Garvin. The first thing to say about Why Girls Love Sailors is that we should feel very lucky to have it. It was considered a lost film until sometime in the 1970s, when it was discovered in a French collection, and even then it only became available for wider viewing over a decade later. To get the best enjoyment from this picture, the viewer needs to know from the outset that this is not a typical Laurel and Hardy comedy. That way expectations are more easily met. Having said that, this is a pleasant little comedy with nice performances by all the players. Stan is once again the star of the show, with Ollie playing a small supporting role as a heavy, and not the primary heavy either. In this film, he plays a rather unpleasant bully who was first mate on board a cargo ship, the Merry Maiden. Moving Picture World from 26th of February 1927 announced Hardy's inclusion in the picture. Oliver Hardy, Hal Roach contract player and motion picture golf champion, has been added to the cast of the latest Roach star comedy, an untitled sea story directed by Fred Gill. The balance of the cast includes Stan Laurel, Viola Richard, Charles Althoff, Polly Moran, Malcolm Waite, and others. The honour of the film and ship's main bully goes to the surly captain, played by Malcolm Waite, notable for his roles in Chaplin's The Gold Rush, 1925, and also a bit part in Hardy's solo Roach film Zenobia, 1939. At the start of the film, we meet Willie Brisling, Stan, and his fiancée Nellie, played by Viola Richard, appearing here for the first time with the boys and indeed on screen. Viola, born Evelyn Viola Richard, was born in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the 26th of January 1904, and would go on to be a familiar face in the early Laurel Hardy comedies, appearing in 5 silent shorts and also later with a small walk-on part in their 1935 classic Tit for Tat. Although Miss Richard didn't have an extensive film career, she did appear in 14 Roach comedies, one particular appearance worthy of note, according to an excellent biographical article written by Brad Farrell, reproduced in the Laurel and Hardy magazine, Volume 8, Number 4, is Charlie Chase's 1928 silent short Limousine Love. Another debuting actor who also shares this first scene, albeit briefly, is one of Stan's old vaudeville colleagues, Charles Althoff. but according to his entry on IMDb, he appears to have had the majority of his scenes cut from the film. Moving Picture World, 12th of February 1927, announced, Charles Altoff, known on most of all the leading vaudeville stages in the country as a Yankee fiddler, will make his debut in pictures under the Hal Roach banner. He is contracted for one picture to play opposite to Stan Laurel. The role he was contracted for was that of fiddle-playing Grandpa Grisling, and his participation in the finished film is nothing short of fleeting. I suppose that one could argue that a professional fiddler's value to a silent film is pretty limited. Happily for him, whilst this may have been his first, it would not be his last appearance in moving pictures. The story begins with Stan flirting with Nellie, and there's a delightful part where his childish embarrassment at kissing his fiancée's cheek sends him whirling around the room, falling over everything in sight and rolling all over the bed in glee. This is still the Stan Laurel from the Solo series, still unsure of his character, still moving around the screen at a fast tempo. Having said that, there is a sense that his character development is continuing to progress, and we can see more of the Stanley mannerisms, including the big trademark smiles, and also quite a bit of his animated crying routine. Unbeknownst to them both, they're being watched by the villainous captain, who has improper and unlawful plans for Nellie. He makes his entrance, and we quickly learn that he and Nellie are old flames. The captain enters the house uninvited, and Nellie tells Stan to show the captain his tattoo of a boat, which Stan does. The captain feigns interest in looking at the tattoo, which is on his chest, and whilst looking at the tattoo, the captain pours a full jug of water down Stan's sweater, causing it to bulge and slosh up and down when he moves. This special effect puts one in mind of the freak endings in later films, such as the bloated stomach in Below Zero. This results in more crying from Stan. The captain decides he's going to take Nellie with him back to his boat, and he drags her away to the dock, where his ship awaits, while Stan bravely gives chase. There follows another laugh-out-loud moment when, in his attempts to stop the kidnap of his fiancée, the captain grabs hold of Stan and throws him around like a rag doll. Stan was actually substituted for something very much like a rag doll in mid-scene, and the effect is obvious, but it's still very funny. The kidnapper gets away with his victim and drags Nellie on board and into his cabin. The basic plot of Why Girls Love Sailors, which was written by Hal Roach himself, is that Stan must now sneak on board the boat and rescue his beloved. To do this, however, he must get past Babe Hardy's nasty first mate character and also overcome the majority of the ship's crew. By chance, he finds a box full of dressing-up clothes, probably an essential item for rough and tough sailors back in the day, and he quickly hatches a plan. He dresses up as a woman and, using his allure, these sailors must have been away at sea for a long time, to trick them into following him to a quiet corner of the boat where he smacks them over the head and they wind up being thrown overboard. It's during this sequence that Stan and Babe do get to share one scene together, in which Hardy, who has also been seduced by Stan's drag act, does his best to woo him/her. There's a nice bit of business between the boys during this exchange, and this scene really stands out and is a joy to watch, with both actors playing the parts brilliantly. Although Babe's character is nowhere near our Ollie in his performance, the performance is superb, and it's great to get a chance to see him use different aspects of his acting skills opposite Stan. Stan succeeds in fooling Hardy and quickly skips away from him. He then once again uses his womanly ways to attract the attention of the roguish captain, coyly waving to him through a porthole, and he gains access to the captain's cabin, where his intended is being held against her will. The culmination of the film ends with the surprise appearance of another familiar and much-loved face in the Laurel and Hardy world, Anita Garvin, making her very first appearance of many with the boys, playing the role of the captain's jealous wife. As usual, Garvin takes a great part and comes across as very fearsome indeed. With 11 appearances alongside Laurel and Hardy, Anita Garvin is, without question, a firm favourite amongst the team's fans, and with good reason. Born on the 11th of February 1906 in New York, she began her career on stage as a Mack Sennett bathing beauty. Her film debut came in 1924 at the Christie Studio, and she first worked with Stan in 1925 during his time with producer Joe Rock, where they appeared in 2 films together, The Snowhawk and The Sleuth. Sadly, according to author Rob Stone, although stills do exist of her in character and on set, illness prevented Anita from completing her scenes in The Snowhawk, and she was replaced by another actress, Julie Leonard. Stan was obviously impressed by Anita's abilities in front of the camera, as later he would promote her to Hal Roach in an attempt to get her signed to Roach's Lot of Fun, which eventually did happen in 1926. Here, in her first film with Laurel and Hardy, she is first accosted by an unwitting Babe Hardy as she climbs aboard the boat. Roughhouse Hardy is no match for Garvin, however, who quickly puts him in his place by kicking him up the backside and then knocks him out with a cold, mean right hook. She quickly locates her husband, the captain, who she finds bouncing a very dodgy-looking lady, Stan in drag, up and down on his knee. When she pulls a gun and threatens to shoot them both, Stan quickly whips off his wig and tells her that it was all a ruse to make her jealous, so that her husband could discover her true feelings for him. All seems forgiven until the captain mimes to Stan that he's going to deal with him later, and not in a caring way, despite the fact that Stan had just saved his bacon. Stan's quick thinking then turns the tables again by using Anita Garvin to his advantage. He opens a locked door to reveal Nellie, locked inside, and tells Garvin that there were 4 others, but they'd already left. He happily skips off with his fiancée, leaving the captain to his wife's fury and a loaded blunderbuss. On their way off the boat, the happy couple peep through the porthole, and in a moment of rather dark humour are happy to see the captain is no more. They skip away merrily until we see the venomous face of a seething Anita Garvin at the porthole, looking out, followed by the barrel of the gun. Her shot blows the clothes off Stan and Viola, and they both run off in terror as the film fades to black. On the 19th of March 1927, Moving Picture World was very complimentary about the casting for the picture, reporting, "Gill finishes MGM film. Excellent cast. Fred Gill has completed the latest Hal Roach star comedy, and one of the most interesting from a player viewpoint. Viola Richard, newcomer to fame, just signed on a long-term contract by Roach. Stan Laurel, Malcolm Waite, Charles Altoff and Oliver Hardy played the principal roles. Malcolm Waite arranged the comedy engagement between 2 feature roles, and Altoff was taken from vaudeville after 13 years' constant appearance as the Yankee Fiddler. The location of the story is on and around a small harbour craft and the docks. The true love of a sailor lad is pictured with Stan Laurel as the sailor and Viola Richard as the girl. Hal Roach now is affiliated with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, who hereafter will release his comedies." Roach did indeed strike up a new deal with MGM to release his comedies, but the first Laurel and Hardy picture to be released under the new contract would be another 6 films down the line, namely Sugar Daddies, 1927. A few months later, July 23rd, 1927, the same publication, Moving Picture World, reviewed the film positively, acknowledging Stan's skills. Stan Laurel has the lion's share of the opportunities in this Hal Roach comedy, which is a burlesque of the heavy sailing ship melodramas. There are quite a number of amusing moments growing out of the story, which centres in the fact that a rough sea captain kidnaps Stan's girl and takes her aboard ship. Unable to lick him, Stan uses strategy, masquerades as a vamp, captivates the captain, and when said captain's jealous wife appears on the scene, she does the rest and Stan escapes with the girl. Viola Richards is the girl in the case, Anita Garvin the wife, and Oliver Hardy the rough sea captain. Stan demonstrates that he can get a lot of laughs out of impersonating a member of the fair sex. So on the whole, Why Girls Love Sailors is fair to middling. It has some nice moments that true Laurel and Hardy fans will enjoy, but I have to admit that after watching the film, I still have no idea why girls love sailors. But I think that's probably irrelevant. And now back to the interview with Chris. Okay, so we'll bring it back to Laurel and Hardy, if we may. We're going to start with Why Girls Love Sailors.
I'm going to tell you my funny story about that.
Okay.
So I think this is back in the 80s, because it was a lost film forever.
Yeah.
And if I recall the name correctly, it was a fellow in the Sons of the Desert named Leo Brooks, who had found it at the Cinémathèque Française, I believe, in Paris, and had somehow managed to get a VHS copy of it. And he was willing to share this with people. It was literally, send me $3 for a VHS tape, and I'll send the film to you. So I did that. And it took forever to arrive. And I got a notice from Canadian Customs because when Leo sent it, there's a little customs slip that's on the envelope, and it said, VHS tape, Why Girls Love Sailors. So Customs has held it because they thought it was porn. and it took like 3 months. But I feel like they must have been deeply disappointed by this film when they finally got to it, right? So I think I was a little disappointed when I saw it too, but yeah, they held it forever. So
okay, so although you were slightly disappointed with the content of Why Girls Love Sailors, what are your takings on it now, Chris?
Well, I think one of the things is because in preparation for this, I did rewatch them. Uh, I'm just gonna do like a little overview, which is when you look at the Roach films at the time, which is the Our Gangs, the Charlie Chase. I think Mabel Normand was just wrapping up her series there, and like I mentioned earlier, her stuff. I thought her Roach films were very, very good. And then Roach had the Glenn Tryon films as well, and those were petering out. And so you had these all-star films where they would have, stars from the past, like Lionel Barrymore or Harry Myers or, Agnes Ayres, that sort of thing. And they're generally the weakest of the lot. The all-star films are kind of not that great, largely because the personalities of these past star performers don't really come through. So I'm taking a little bit of a long walk on this before we get to it, right? So they bolster it with people like Stan and Babe and other people as well. And it wasn't till, and I think you probably already talked about it, till you get to Love 'Em and Weep. And Mae Bush is in there. And Mae Bush is like the first former star who really rips up the screen. We screened that at the Toronto Silent Film Festival last year, and it went over big because she and Finn are just dynamite in that, right? But so Roach eventually abandons the all-star concept in terms of being past stars and goes, okay, well, I've got this nice roster of performers like Babe Hardy and Stan Laurel and other people, Anita Garvin. So let's just start focusing on them. But because Stan hasn't found his character yet, and Hardy is still playing a little bit of this Vernon Dent role of just being a burly guy who shows up every now and then, they don't really gel. So I think that when you get to Why Girls Love Sailors, Stan is very much still into that more effeminate character that you don't really kind of connect with him that much. And when he's in the earlier all-star films with the bigger stars, he's generally playing a butler or something like that. And so he's a supporting role, and he has those nice little moments in there. And he's almost more palatable that way when he's the butler who's trying to help Agnes Ayres get these love letters, that sort of thing. And he gets these little moments and does some terrific stuff. But when he's made the star of the film, it's not quite working as well. And in this one in particular, he doesn't get a lot of opportunity to do stuff with it. I think they maybe only have about 3 minutes together. So it's not working. It's not an inspired film. It feels very kind of made up as they went along. And, kind of the main centerpiece is Stan in drag. There's an odd thing that for some reason this ship has a trunk of costumes that belong to a female impersonator. Okay, right. I think there's a line in one of the McCabe's books about Frank Butler, who was kind of the head of the staff at Roach scriptwriting, doing a joke about that the hero pulls an elephant tusk from under a bed and wallops someone with it, and someone goes, well, where'd the elephant tusk come from? It's like, because the goddamn prop man put it there.
Yeah, that's it.
This is what this feels a bit like, right? So there's some nice stuff where Stan in drag kind of lures the different sailors out so he can wallop them on the head, so he can save his girlfriend who's been kidnapped. For those who haven't seen the film, that's the plot. His girlfriend's been kidnapped by a burly sailor who is not Oliver Hardy, but Ollie is kind of the second mate on it. And then what's interesting is, going back to Atoll K, is that is a gag that they introduce into Atoll K later on with Susie Dallaire kind of luring people away when she has the flower covered in pepper. And then when they come over to her and sniff the flower and sneeze, she wallops them on the head. So it all comes back to Atoll K. But there's not a lot of chemistry there between Stan and Babe, beyond the fact that they're good comic performers. Babe's a little bit more interesting. He does some nice looks into the camera, sort of thing. But he's kind of that gruff, rough and tumble character that he'd also play in with Love and Hisses. So it's just one of those. I think if you looked at what was happening in silent comedy in the late-ish 20s, like around 27, you go, okay, that was okay, but I couldn't see anyone getting excited about it. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't give you the idea that someday this is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah.
okay, that was just another two-reeler. And when you look at the greater Roach output at the time, kind of not to the same par as what Charlie Chase was doing, definitely, or the Our Gang kids. It just didn't have that. What was interesting always about Roach was the best series had kind of a guiding force behind them. So the Mabels had Leo McCarey. The Our Gangs had Bob McGowan. Charlie Chase drove his own stuff. Later on, Stan obviously would drive the Laurel and Hardy films. But because that wasn't really there yet, even though Stan was a director at Roach, he still hadn't found his zone. So there's nothing really inspiring about it. There's nothing where you go, I can see that glimmer of something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah. No. I mean, I like it. I think it's interesting for what it is. As you say, that with the Our Gang and Charlie Chase, they've got characters that they are very, that they're going places, whereas Stan and Bade, they're not anywhere near what we come to know them to be. It's just diverting, isn't it? It's a nice little bit of action. It's nice to see Viola Richard. I enjoy her performances in the films that she's in. And obviously Anita Garvin makes her first appearance with the boys at the end. And yeah, there's some nice gags in there. I like. I mean, at the end of the day, it's Laurel and Hardy on the screen. I could watch them all day just doing that. It's fine. I like to see Stan flirting around the bedroom because he's had a small kiss on the cheek from his girlfriend, and rolling off the bed. Yeah, it's fun stuff. It's not brilliant. It's not the best, but I think it's just waiting for the magic to happen and for them to actually say, no, use them this way, for God's sake. This is what these guys are intended for. So, but again, it's frustration, I think, when you see these early films. You think, come on, get to it. When are you actually going to gel and be the team that we want you to be? But yeah, it's interesting stuff, but not the best.
Well, it was funny because, when I was a kid, did you ever see the Robert Youngson compilation films, like Further Perils and Laughing 20s? And he'd always do kind of almost this chronological thing at the beginning, where he'd show a little bit of solo stuff. It's almost like this little history lesson. Here's a clip from The Hobo, or Just Rambling Along, and that was the prehistoric days of Laurel and Hardy. And then he would throw in something like Flying Elephants, and or Sugar Daddies, and he'd do the whole, these were the days when Stan and Ollie were just on the cusp of greatness.
Yes.
And when I was watching those as a kid, it was, again, there were these alternate reality Laurel and Hardy films where it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. And that was something that again, from reading the Everson book when I was a kid, to go, helped you get to know the people better.
Yeah.
Somehow. Right.
Yeah.
So you had this strange, bizarro Laurel and Hardy, where you would have something, if you want to start getting into With Love and Hisses, where they're adversaries, right? Or Flying Elephants as well. They're a lot of their early films are adversaries, right? So they didn't really take that Langdon and Vernon Dent thing too seriously at the beginning. Hardy was the heavy, like he was with the Larry Seaman films, and Stan was still the Stan he had been for X number of years leading up to that, right? So that's why it's almost like a shock to the system when you see something as good as Do Detectives Think, kind of wedged between With Love and Hisses and Flying Deuces, right? How fully formed they almost were, and then they went away with it. Stan was back to his more effeminate character, little twinkle star.
Oh yeah.
The kind of the last you'd see of that would be Putting Pants on Philip. It's like, oh man, you came that close.
That's right.
With Do Detectives Think, right?
Yeah, Flying Elephants is just totally out of left field. I don't know who was this. They must have been on acid when they were thinking of that one. It was just, I mean, I suppose there are similar comedies with other comedians doing a Flying Elephants type of caveman-ish thing. But yeah, when you've had Do Detectives Think and then you suddenly get Flying Elephants, I just can't get my head around that one at all.
Well, Flying Elephants is a lot like With Love and Hisses. And Why Girls Love Sarah. It's like they're making it up.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
They don't have, later on, Laurel and Hardy would go, here's what we're going to do for 20 minutes. we're going to fix up a boat. There's no plot there. We're just fixing up a boat. This doesn't even have that. It's just like, all right, we're cavemen. Oh, we're in the army. With love and hisses. It's just there's kind of no thought to it.
And now it's time for the second audio blog of the episode, and the second film in focus is With Love and Hisses from 1927. It was filmed March the 14th to March the 30th, 1927. It was a two-reeler produced by Hal Roach, directed by Fred Gill, titles by H.M. Walker, the main cast Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy, James Finlayson and Anita Garvin. With Love and Hisses is once again a Hal Roach-penned Stan Laurel comedy, with Oliver Babe Hardy playing a supporting role as the bruising bully, Top Sergeant Banner. Banner's irritant for the duration of the film is, of course, Stan as Private Cuthbert Hope. The relationship between the boys is that of the bully and the bullied, and whilst it's not the same as their long-standing Stan and Ollie characters, it does work quite well here, and the boys do have more opportunity to bounce off one another. Similarly, what also works well here are the relationships between Stan and the returning Jimmy Finlayson in the role of the Army Captain Bustle, and also between Babe and Finlayson. Finlayson is at his usual dependable best with exasperating expressions and reactions in abundance. Cuthbert Hope is arguably closer to the Stanley character than we have seen in any of the pre-team films, certainly since Duck Soup. Hope is an innocent, simple fellow, not out to cause trouble, but certainly causing plenty as he stumbles through life. In fact, very similar to our Stan and Ollie, Cuthbert unwittingly sets Hardy's Sergeant Banner up multiple times. In one instance at the train station, the location of which was the Santa Fe station, well known amongst Laurel and Hardy fans for its appearance in Birthmarks, Stan mistakenly thinks that a couple of ladies are waving to him. He starts to wave back, but then decides that they're actually trying to get Babe's attention. He graciously directs Babe's gaze to the ladies, and the superior sergeant confidently struts over to begin his wooing of said ladies. Unfortunately for Babe, the ladies were in fact waving to Captain Finlayson, and so he soon finds himself in hot water, thanks mainly to Stan. One of Finlayson's ladies is played by the returning Anita Garvin, fresh from her first role with the boys in Why Girls Love Sailors. Following Babe's wooing attempts, we have a standout marker of just how far away from the familiar Ollie character we are in this film. Anita rejects Babe's advances, pushing him away physically by his head. In a tit-for-tat moment, Babe gets into a rather heavy-handed pushing match with Miss Garvin and pushes her back, also by the head. Not at all what we're used to from the soft southern gentleman of the team's iconic pictures. I must admit I find it quite jarring to watch these early comedies where Ollie is pitted against Stan in often such a brutal fashion. I guess it's down to the affection I've nurtured for them and their established characters over the many years I've been studying them. To then return to these pre-team films is quite a shock. But putting my offended sensibilities to one side, I will say that this is not actually a bad film. It has some good laugh-out-loud moments. For me, the film starts well at the station and on the train. I particularly and somewhat controversially like the scenes on the train which has a number of jokes centred on foul smells. I especially like Stan's reaction to the stinky garlic being consumed by the guy opposite him in the train's cramped compartment, and the pie flying through the window into a smug Captain Finlayson's face. The remainder of the film is not the best, however, although there are some funny moments at the military camp where Stan is in the inspection lineup and his captain is not impressed, to say the least. And the passing of Stan's rifle between he and Finlayson, which gets more and more forceful with each passing. It's great, if a little eye-watering at the end, as Stan gets the rifle full in the face. Building on the special effect from the previous film, the water down Stan's jumper, this film includes 3 more visual effects. There's Stan's inflating and deflating gas mask on the train, Stan's throbbing feet whilst on the foot march back to camp, and then finishing with the freak ending of hugely swollen bottoms caused by multiple bee stings to their rear ends. An interesting point to note from behind the camera, as informed by Randy Skretvet, is the fact that the supervising director at the Roach Studios, F. Richard Jones, who was praised with turning the fortunes of the studio around, resigned his post quite suddenly at this time. Shortly afterwards, it was announced that replacing him in the role would be Leo McCary, who previously had been responsible for the Charlie Chase comedies, but now became supervising director for everything coming out of the Roach Studios. And it was McCary who eventually would be given the ultimate kudos for noticing the potential of, and eventually teaming, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy together in their own series of comedies. In a 1972 interview with director Peter Bogdanovich, cited in Wes D. Gehring's Laurel and Hardy, a biobibliography, McCary himself explained what the role of supervising director actually entailed. Supervisor meant being responsible for practically everything on the film: story, gags, screening the rushes, working on the editing, sending out the prints, cutting again, and when the previews weren't good enough. But in those days, your name wasn't mentioned in the credits. The industry knew who'd do what. Contemporary reviews for the film weren't overwhelming in praise, but they could also have been worse. Moving Picture World, August 27th, 1927. Oliver Hardy, Jimmy Finlayson and Stan Laurel are about evenly supplied with comedy opportunities in this Hal Roach offering, which is a travesty on a military training camp. It's a two-reeler of average amusement value with considerable slapstick and much of the humour familiar with pictures of this type. Film Daily, August 28, 1927, reported, "A grab bag of comics. Here is something that is a little broader than an evident satire on citizens' training camps. Facial expressions rather than situations and gags contribute to the humour, and in this line of delivery Stan Laurel and Jimmy Finlayson can take a lot of punishment. Oliver Hardy makes things easier on the eye." Whatever that means. With Love and Hisses is a far cry from the classic Laurel and Hardy films, but the magic is most definitely there and makes the film certainly worthy of inspection. What it does do is reinforce to the modern viewer how much we'd rather see the boys united against the world instead of fighting against each other.
At last you're using my brain.
And here's what Chris thought about With Love and Hisses.
What's interesting about it, I was going through Randy Skretvet's book of scripts, and the original script for With Love and Hisses is in there. And it's 12 pages long. And then you get to the script for Dirty Work in 1933, and it's 3 pages long.
Yeah.
So it's like they have these really detailed descriptions of not great gags and zero story for the earlier film. And then, later on when they're developed, it's like, here's 3 pages of, they shove a brush up the chimney and the bricks come down. That's all you need, right?
Yeah, With Love and Hisses, I was watching that again the other night. That kind of, it starts well. I quite like the start of it at the station, and and especially when they first get on the train, and Stan keeps setting Ollie up for grief with Finlayson. But then it kind of peters out for me. It doesn't really go very far, when they actually get to the camp, and it's all of that sort of messing around in the lineup. I don't know. I just sort of drifted off at that point.
Yeah, well, it's pretty basic stuff. What's interesting, because I had mentioned buying it when I was a kid as a 10-minute, 200-foot silent reel. It works better.
Yeah, I can imagine it would do. Yeah,
because it's tighter. You don't expect much from it. If I recall correctly, the structure of it was the train station stuff at the beginning with Finlayson, and then they're at the camp, and there's a little bit of the right dress stuff, a little bit of the drill, and then the whole thing of them marching, going skiddy dipping, the clothes burning, etc. Right? So that's pretty good. That's a one-reeler, and that was kind of the structure of one-reelers back then, which is, all the one-reelers Stan did at Hal Roach was you didn't need a story. It was like, here's Stan, as a waiter or picking oranges or whatever. And that's what this feels like, except it's like, oh, now we got to make it 20 minutes. Right? And there's a lot of, again, it's just not inspired stuff. There's this long scene with, Stan in the train and somebody eating garlic and smelly cheese, and soldiers with their boots off so their feet smell. It's just like, okay, well, yeah. So it's just people reacting to smells.
Smells, yeah. I actually like that bit. I don't know if that's just my strange warped sense of humour. And I was watching that part with my 2 boys, and they found that hilarious, which I think shows you the level of that humour, doesn't it? The bit where Finlayson's trying to get to sleep, and he's all pleased with himself in his nice little bunk, and then the pie comes through the window and slaps him in the face.
Did you notice the hand? You can see the hand throwing the pie.
Oh, did you know how to spot that, though?
Take a good look if you're looking at it. When Finn gets the pie in the face, you can actually see the hand throw it. So.
Yeah, and there's the gas mask special effects as well with the Stan breathing in the. Yeah, I like that.
It may be a film that's like made for 7-year-olds.
It probably is. Yeah, it probably
I
is.
don't know, but for me, when I was watching it as a discerning 13-year-old the first time,
Yes.
and now as a discerning middle-aged man, that doesn't do a lot for me.
No. It must be my British sense of humour. I like the stinky bits.
Well, yeah. And there's things that just don't go, like the thing with the billboard and for the Volga boatman where their heads go through. It's just okay, that happened. And the script actually plays out some more gags when you read the script in Randy's book, but it doesn't go anywhere. And then they knock over. It just feels like they threw everything in there. Let's throw some cactus bees in. And then, but at least in this one, they have like a payoff gag at the end with all their butts swollen up, which is, versus Bonnie Scotland, where they just run away. There's no end to it. So, but yeah, I think that overall these two films, I want to thank you for having me on to talk about the two weakest films.
Oh, you're welcome.
In their early careers. But I'm kind of with you on with Flying Elephants as well. So, okay, well, it has that kind of same structure as with Love and Hisses. It's just like, let's do some jokes.
Yeah, I'll make sure I get you back on for Flying Elephants then, Chris.
Now I want to watch it.
Yeah, I haven't drawn the short straw for who's coming on for that episode yet.
Yeah, you're a cruel man, Patrick.
Oh, of course, it's got to be done. It's the power. Okay, thanks for that, Chris. I'm going to just ask you one final question, which I haven't given you in advance, and that's not intentional. I've only just kind of come up with it. What I'm going to do is ask you, and to be honest, I quite like the thought of you haven't had time to prepare the answer for this one. If you're on an atoll,
yes,
and you have, I'm going to let you keep 3 films: a talkie short, and a feature, and a Laurel and Hardy book. What are you going to take with you?
Okay, so the 3 films are Laurel and Hardy films.
Yeah.
Okay. The silent, I'm gonna go outside with this one. I'm gonna say We Fall Down.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why, because you mentioned Leo McCarey earlier. It's a really subtly done film. And we showed this at the Toronto Silent Film Festival a few years ago. And there was so much laughter in the audience that people outside the cinema was wondering what the noise.
Wow, fantastic.
I'd never seen a reaction to a film. So it's a film, like there's certain films like Birthmarks and Be Big where people think they drag on. And I think that it might be a thing that if they saw it with an audience, it would be a different thing. Yeah. And maybe if I saw With Love and Hisses with an audience, I'd think differently about it too. But it just has some wonderful stuff where there's a thing at the beginning where, Babe is leaning forward, and then when he pulls back, you see he's hidden, obscured Stan, and Stan's behind him. It's got this weird depth to it. It's hard to describe kind of on a podcast what it's like, but and also it just the thing at the end when Ollie's acting out the things that set up the vaudeville show, and then Stan finally just, it's so absurd, he starts laughing, and then Ollie's trying to not laugh.
Yeah.
But he's laughing.
Yeah.
It's this beautiful thing of, it's before their characters got really, really stupid, right? Or Stan's at least, right? It's got a little bit more of a humanity to it. And I love every era of Laurel and Hardy except arguably the 40s. But Stan is a little bit more human in these silent films, and the fact, and that comes back in Atoll K actually. The fact that he's grounded enough to go, this is stupid.
Yeah,
what we're doing here, and he just starts laughing. And Babe joins in. It's really delightful. It's a surprising. It took me by surprise how much. I really just enjoyed spending time with this one.
Yes.
Like some of the other ones are like the ones that are considered the greater films, like Liberty or which has great stuff where they're trying to change their pants, or Big Business or Two Tars. Those are kind of dependent more on the gags and how the personalities infuse the gags. But it's all the reciprocal destruction, or it's the high and dizzy stuff. This is just like a situation comedy that would ultimately inspire Sons of the Desert. But very delicate. It's a very delicate film. And I saw, I'm going to, again, if I'm droning on, I saw a newspaper article for it at the time, which I can't really quote, but they were just talking about Laurel and Hardy testing these two films to see which audiences liked better, which was, and I believe one was made, I think Two Tars came first and then We Fall Down, but I think they were consecutive. And it was like, here's the big broad comedy one, Two Tars, and here's the more situational one. And, you know, which one's going to get the bigger belly laughs, right? So I think there was that exploration going on. I would be curious to go, if you just took an audience who didn't know who Laurel and Hardy really were, a good sized audience, I'm talking like 100 or more people, put them in a room and show them both, which one would get the bigger laugh? I think people would be surprised.
Yeah, okay. Good answer. I like it.
Is that
okay. No, it's good. So you're talkie short?
I'm going to go with Toad in the Hole.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Because it's just them, and there's a lot of films like that where it's you know, like Helpmates being an obvious example, Music Box to an example, you know, the one. But it's just this. Here they are on the boat, and it's just them. You have Billy Gilbert at the beginning. They have this philosophical speech about here we are, two grown men acting like children. It's like, well, it's your fault. No, it's not. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's a very in character. It has this really lovely thing with Stan inside the boat after he's been chastised by Ollie. He has the drawing of Ollie that he pokes in the eye. That'll teach him. He gets his head stuck behind the mast, right? So he has this little bit, but it's all surprising to me, right? Because it's mathematical that he would get his head stuck behind there, and of course he has to saw it, and he has to go, okay, cut my neck, kind of thing. And they keep cutting to Hardy, like at the top of the mast, kind of thing, going, what's that noise? So it just builds nicely, and it's not big slapstick. It's very just small character stuff. And then there's this really beautiful part where when Stan goes, how'd you get that paint on your face? And then Ollie goes after him, and then Stan's hiding, but then he's like looking over the edge of the
I love that.
boat, and he's looking through the little
There's little slats.
All you see is just his eyes, right? And nobody else could do that, right? There's not a single performer, there's not a single comic performer who could do something like that. Just take their time and be likable. You know, I think that's a thing with Laurel and Hardy too. Is just there's nobody else like them at that time. You know, a period where you have the Marx Brothers and that sort of thing. It's just like that. It's just these two real human guys. Toad in the Hole is just, again, spending time with these guys are going to make you laugh.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Absolutely. And your final pick is your feature.
My feature is surprisingly not Atoll K, even though I'm on Atoll. But I'm gonna go old school and Way Out West.
Way Out West, perfect.
Way Out West, it's. I saw it. They had the UCLA restoration. They screened it here in Toronto back before Christmas time. Good crowd for it. People went nuts about Finlayson. Finlayson floored people in that. He's great in that. It just has everything for me, plus that little extra magic of the songs and dance kind of thing. Gives it that extra charm. But it's funny. It's interesting. It's when they're starting to get a little bit more slapsticky. You know, there's the thing with the Stan stretching Ollie's neck when he's pulling him up. Kind of thing. And that's stuff that you wouldn't have seen in Our Relations. Yeah. You know, or you might not have seen earlier. So it starts getting, they're starting to get a little cartoony, but that's okay.
The white magic. Yeah,
the white magic starts to show up. It's just charming. The music in it is fantastic. Like the score is terrific. When I was a kid, this was pre-video, they had albums. You could buy soundtrack albums on vinyl. And I had the soundtrack of that, and you couldn't watch the movie on demand, but you could listen to it, right? So I would listen to Way Out West endlessly, and because I'd seen it, I could fill in the blanks visually. So it imprinted on me, kind of like how baby ducks imprint on, you know, the first thing they see, and think it's their mother. But it's got so much great stuff in it. It starts off strong with setting the premise up with Finlayson and Lola Marcel. Laurel and Hardy are introduced wonderfully. They get lots of time to themselves. Just everything clicks into place. There's not a weak moment or a dull moment in it. It just goes from one strength to the next. You know, you have the laughter scene we talked about with Stan and Lola. You've got Dave at his best with like, eat the hat. Right? And then, nothing.
And the sets are great as well. I think the sets are brilliant in Way Out West. You know, it's a very believable, immersive world that they're in. You know, because it's not the broached back like as we know it. You know, it's it's a classic film. Yeah, brilliant film.
There's nothing wrong with that film at all. I love it. Fabulous choice.
And finally, Chris, what Laurel and Hardy book are you taking with you?
Oh, I'm going to take this one. You can't see it because of the podcast. I'm taking Randy's new volume, Randy's Cretbets, The Magic Behind the Movies, just because you can go one extreme, which would be Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, which is, you know, that kind of nice, light biography about the boys. I still think it's the best. I mean, it doesn't talk about the warts. It doesn't get in depth like Simon Lewish's biography does. It is exactly what it sets out to be, which is an affectionate biography. It's of its time, but if you just want to know everything, Randy finds that really perfect balance of, you can tell that his affection is there as well.
Yeah.
He loves these guys, but the research is insane that he can pull this out, you know, whatever, 30 years after his first double it in scope, and you can still learn new stuff. This is a thing that I think that I could bring to the island or the atoll and read it. I could read it 3 times.
Yes.
And then die. Like how long it would take me to digest all the information.
That's right. Yeah, so, it is brilliant. It's decades of work, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and it's brilliant. And that's why I couldn't be happier that Randy is spearheading, or at least a force behind the new Blu-ray set and the stuff that he's contributing to that. He's like one of the heroes of the Laurel and Hardy movement. You know.
Oh, absolutely.
Among many, but huge fondness for what he's done.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
If you're listening, Randy, your book's coming with me.
God bless you, Randy. Absolutely. Fantastic. Chris, that is wonderful. I've really, really enjoyed talking to you today. It's been fun. Fantastic. Would you come back on again in the future?
Yeah, in a couple of years when you talk about Atoll. Yeah.
Not flying elephants then.
Not flying elephants. I'll talk to you about Zenobia though. When you get to Zenobia.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right.
I'll talk to you about Zenobia a little bit.
Zenobia, right? Okay.
Or maybe when you get to We Fall Down.
Yeah. Okay. You're on.
So we'll
do
that one. If you're looking at We Fall Down, make sure you see the one with the original Vitaphone soundtrack, which I think is a little bit hard to come by. It was on a German DVD. Kinowelt DVD, but it's got the original soundtrack, and it has a great when they're with the girls and they're laughing. It actually has laughter on the soundtrack, which was
I think that's on the. I've got the UK 21 disc set, the Universal disc set. I think that's on there. I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
Well, what's great is that's a takeoff on like a famous record from the early 20s called the OK Laughing record.
Oh, okay.
So that's where they got that, and that's obviously the inspiration for later. You know, in Blotto and Fra Diavolo and Way Out West and Scram, the laughing sequences, right?
Yeah.
But that is my pick of the week. Everyone go watch the original Vitaphone score on We Fall Down.
Chris, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been an absolute blast. And we will hopefully speak to you again on the blogcast very soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
And that really is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for being with me once again. As usual, thanks go to Piet Schroeder, Basta Music, and all at the Bohunks Orchestra. Don't forget, you can follow the blog at laurelandhardyblog.com. You can follow the Facebook page. You can join us on Bloghead's Facebook group. You can find us on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube, and you can even shop with us on our Amazon store. So thank you once again, and all that remains is for me to say goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. Goodbye.